Everyone, thank you so much for joining us on this rather cool November morning to talk about a topic which is absolutely critical for the sector. Vans, and how are we going to decarbonize them? So we've got an absolutely stellar cast for you today to run through this issue. But as always, on a BVRLA webinar, there's some housekeeping to do before we start. So firstly, we've just got to run through the competition law elements. As always, this is run in accordance with BVRLA's competition law rules. There's some clear do's and don'ts, and we will be making sure that we're compliant throughout. With that, slightly boring but out the way, I think the key thing to say is on this issue, as on all our issues in the fleets and charge stream, we want engagement, interaction, conversation. So please do drop a question. You can do that on the side. We have people, I guess, in the Christmas spirit. We have elves out there who can help you if you are struggling technically, and they can jump in and give you some advice. But please do ask questions, engage. As I said, we have some really great folks on today, and it would be an absolute shame if we don't try and poke and prod with some good questions from the crowd. So what else do we have? What else do we have going on? Well, this webinar is going to be recorded. It'll be put out on the BVRLA website. We've got a number of resources which we're going to talk about in this webinar. All of those will be on the BVRLA website. So just to highlight, please do make use of that, share it with colleagues, talk to others, and we can move on through it. Before we get into any of the speakers, though, we have a little bit from the BVRLA's perspective to talk about this space. We all know that vans and the van market on the sort of road to zero is not necessarily the plain sailing that we would hope it would be. We've had a lot of situations where vans have, for the last little while, lagged a little bit from where we would want them to be. And the BVRLA does an annual piece of work, which I hope you're all familiar with and read avidly, but if not, we're going to take you through it a little bit now, which is our Road to Zero report card, which is really a annual take on where we are as a sector, as a fleet sector on our road to decarbonization. So let's zoom in a little bit on where we are from the van perspective. And if we can go to the next slide, please. What we do is we look at the whole market, cars, vans, and HGVs, everything our members run. And really, the car picture is one of things moving quite rapidly. There's a lot of good work going on there, mostly driven by the benefit in kind tax regime, as you will all be familiar with. And there's also a lot of great product. And there's more and more product entering the market. Vans, however, are struggling. We don't really have the speed of transition that we want. There are challenges with product. There's challenges with infrastructure, fit for purpose infrastructure. There are challenges with firms understanding exactly how to use these products. So this is the landscape we're operating in right now. And if we go to the next slide, please. What does that look like in a bit more detail? Well, you have a situation where vans, quite regularly, there are not nearly as many models on the market as cars. The vans that are on the market often don't have very good ranges. We see a very small number of vans which have anything close to the same average ranges as cars. But also when we start looking at demand and more generally, we've had a situation where from our rental members, which I think is a really true measure of demand, there is much lower demand for e-vans than ICE. I think most of these things are things which folks in the industry are keenly aware of. It's a challenging space. And if we go to the next slide, please. We know it's not just a challenging space from the product that's out there and the demand for it, but also the infrastructure and the challenges around data and accessibility, and almost a focus from an infrastructure perspective of building things for individuals. when we talk to local authorities, and we've done a lot of work on this, they are almost always thinking about people taking their vehicles home, and those people are car drivers, and they're not necessarily thinking of the van driver who has to take their vehicle home. Similarly, while there's a massive increase in charging out there, and it's actually growing a lot faster than I think most people are aware of, there is a real challenge with those spaces being accessible to vans, with those charge points really being van appropriate. Things like pre-booking, being able to have live data around charge points is all not where it needs to be. So we have a challenge from demand, but we also have wider ecosystem challenges with vans. And if we go to the next slide, please. That's the system we're operating in, but it's not all bad news. I think there's a lot of fantastic progress going on out there, and that's what we're going to try and unpack a little bit in this webinar. But also, the BVRLA has been doing a huge amount of work on the van front, and those of you who are involved in our working groups, committees, come to our conferences, etc., will be aware of that. But what we're trying to do is we're going to only increase that drumbeat next year, and so I would say watch this space. There are some really positive things going on in the e-van space and the zero emission van space, and that's where we want to try and grow a bit of focus and understanding in the sector. But there's also definitely more that needs to be done from the policy side, and we need to maintain the pressure there. So watch this space. We had a van plan, which we launched back in 2021. We now have a large group of parties who we're working with to try and update that, but really in a meaningful way in the year ahead. So it's an area of focus for us. It's one we really want to see at the forefront of policymakers' minds, and one which we will continue to engage with the membership on. There's a lot of positive going on. But that's enough from the BVRLA. I am very happy to be able to introduce one of those policymakers who we regularly bother on the van question, Lizzie, joint head of OZEV. So Lizzie's going to take us through some bits, and then we're going to have a bit of a Q&A with her. So thank you so much for joining us, Lizzie. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. Thank you very much for having me today. Hopefully you can all now see my slides. So decarbonisation of vans is really crucial to our efforts to decarbonise our transport system and reach net zero by 2050. So I'm really pleased to be here today to talk a little bit about what the government is doing to enable that transition. So just a bit about kind of the importance and why vans are so critical to the decarbonisation challenge. In 2021, vans alone accounted for about 16% of the UK domestic transport emissions. Now that's a huge opportunity for vans to become the road to zero hero, but also recognise that van decarbonisation faces a particular set of challenges. So today I'm going to update you on where we are in transition to zero emission vans and the work the government is doing to continue supporting you to make this switch. So first of all, how are we doing? Where are we now? There are over 1 million plug-in vehicles on the UK roads today. And over the last year, we've seen a 45% increase in the total volume of plug-in vehicles on the roads. In terms of market share, particularly for new vans, that is lower than where we would like it to be. We're at about 5% of market share to date this year. But that's continuing to contribute to kind of new volume of zero emission vans on the road. But we also need a robust and reliable public charge point network to support that transition to zero emission vans. So according to industry figures, we have now tipped over into 50,000 charge points. That's a 42% increase in the number of public charge points since last year. But we know that there is a bit of geographical disparity in that number of charge points, but that is improving. And government investment is specifically designed to help address that challenge, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But we know there's more to do to reach our goal of net zero and 100% new zero emission vans in 2035. So where are we going next? There are kind of three primary challenges in transitioning to zero emission vehicles. Firstly, having a secure and adequate supply of vehicles, particularly the right models. And for vans, we know that means higher ranges and taking that into account despite your heavier payloads. Second is a strong consumer demand for those vehicles. I know the challenge remains around upfront cost of those vehicles, despite some savings in running and maintenance costs. But we're also working across government to make sure that the van regulations address the slightly heavier weight due to the battery and ensure that your payload, you can have that extra payload despite kind of the additional weight associated with that battery. And third, a visible and consistent recharging infrastructure. So the drivers have the confidence that they can find a charge point wherever they need it, and the charge point is suitable for their needs. So on supply, currently going through Parliament, there's a second debate in the Commons this morning, is the Vehicle Emissions Trading Schemes Order. That's the legislation that will introduce the UK Zero Emission Vehicle mandate. That is world-leading regulation of its kind. From next year, that means that the government will set the proportion of cars and vans that must be zero emission each year out until 80% of new cars and 70% of new vans by 2030. That ZEV mandate is designed to secure the supply of vehicles and encourage manufacturers to increase the number of vehicles and models available. You know, that's particularly important for vans. And on demand, we continue to have the plug-in vehicle grant for vans to help decrease those upfront costs. And as I said, we're working across government to standardise the regulations regarding the weight threshold is 4.25 tonnes. Most recently, in the last few weeks, government has invested £2 billion new investment in the automotive supply chain, and on Sunday published a UK battery strategy. Those will work in partnership to kind of bring forward innovation and hopefully cheaper battery types and kind of innovation in the automotive supply chain to make sure that the vehicles and the models that we need are available. So then on the third challenge in terms of a visible charging network across the country. So there's kind of three main areas of focus that government are looking at. The first is on consumer experience. Second is the pace of rollout, particularly in local areas, and focusing on kind of consistent geographic coverage across all local authorities. And thirdly, making sure that when drivers are making long distance journeys, there are the charge points along the strategic road network that they can quickly charge and get on their way. So I'm going to start with consumer experience. So earlier in November, 24th of November, the consumer experience regulations, public charge point regulations as they're known, came into force. So from now, across all charge points, there will be a standardized payment metric. So all charges will be described, all charge points will have pence per kilowatt hour to describe the price. Similar to when you pull up to a petrol or diesel forecourt, you know exactly how much you're going to pay before you have to do it. There are other regulations that will be coming into force next year and the year after around payments, making it easier to find charge points through open data requirement. And that's not only finding the charge points, but making sure those charge point is what you need. So for vans, that may mean a charge point that has a larger charging bay. Also on reliability, so across the rapid charging network, they will need to be an average of 99% reliable, making sure that when drivers turn up to a rapid charge point, they know it will be working. And if it's not working, there'll be a 24/7 helpline where you will get through to a person to help you resolve that issue. From 2025, all charge point operators will need to offer payment roaming. So you can pay with kind of more than one different app. So you don't need to have kind of an app for every single charge point. On the second, in terms of local charge point infrastructure, we have our 381 million local electric vehicle infrastructure fund. The important thing about this is we are giving that funding to local authorities as they best know the needs of their local areas, for example, around the needs for van charging. And that will help local authorities to develop a local charging strategy and work with industry to roll out those charge points. We know that local authorities aren't at the moment, not always have the capability in place to draft those charging strategies and then deliver those commercial arrangements to put in the charge points. So alongside the capital funding for those charge points, we're also providing capability funding for them to recruit that additional and expert resource. Alongside that, we also have a knowledge hub and support body, and that provides kind of information about commercial arrangements and best practice guidance for putting in those charge points. So we hope that that will enable local authorities to have the tools to put the charge points in the right places that address the needs of their local area. So on making sure that all drivers, when they're making a long distance journey, have the confidence that they will be able to find a charge point along the strategic road network, and that they will be able to kind of rapidly charge and then get on their way, so it doesn't add a lot of time to their long distance journey. To do this, we're working through the project Rapid. So at the moment, we're working on some early stage intervention projects with industry to support motorway service areas to increase the grid capacity at their sites to put in the rapid and ultra rapid charge points that we need. In some areas, that has been battery storage systems, and in others, early reinforcement to the grid. Those are laying the pipeline for the delivery of our full rapid charging fund, which will work with motorway service areas and industry to upgrade the electricity capacity at some motorway service areas where it's not commercially viable to do so. Motorway service areas are particularly a problem because often they are in quite remote areas and do not have a very large grid capacity at the moment. And that will need to scale up to support the rollout of rapid and ultra rapid charge points to support the mass transition to zero emission vehicles. Finally, wanted to touch on the plan for drivers, because within this, there are 7 measures that will support the continued rollout for electric vehicles. So I've touched again, it builds upon the Rapid Charging Fund, the Connections Action Plan published by the Department for Energy Security Net Zero as part of the autumn statement. We will work as DFT with the distribution network operators and charge point operators to accelerate and review the grid connections process. And as I know, often it is a different process according to which DNO you speak to. We will also be looking and consulting on measures around planning to speed up the approvals process for installation of charge points, and looking at the permitted development rights to around people's homes to potentially allow cross pavement solutions so more people can benefit from domestic tariffs when they're charging near their home. However, we need to make sure any cross pavement solution is safe. So we will be providing guidance to local authorities on what we believe is a safe cross pavement solution. Once we have done both of those steps, we will consider opening up our EV charge point grants to allow the use of cross-pavement solutions to access those grants. And finally, and most importantly, we will continue to work with BVRLA and other industries to address some of the myths and misconceptions that continue to be raised around electric vehicles, to make sure that drivers have full confidence to make the switch. Thank you very much for your time this morning. I look forward to continue working with the BVRLA and you to really make sure that vans become the road to zero hero, as I mentioned at the start. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lizzie. I must say, all our conversations with OZEV, you're aware of all the challenges. You're totally on top of what's going on. I think the difficulty is always trying to solve them. Vans are not a simple space. There's not a single lever one can pull. I know there are a few questions which have come in, but I have some questions of my own. So using the sort of chair's prerogative, I thought I'd sneak one in before I start going to audience questions. And I think that's really about the ZEV mandate. not necessarily the technical details, since that's another part of DFT, but from OZEV's perspective, what are your hopes for the ZEV mandate and how you think the market might change with the ZEV mandate's introduction? Are we going to see a flurry of a new product, do you think? How do you sort of see it playing out in the next sort of 2 to 3 years, the sort of immediate impact?
So I think the ZEV mandate is a really critical piece of legislation that's coming through. For us, we really hope that it kind of does two things. So firstly is that long-term policy certainties. People know that it's confirmed in legislation the government's plans to transition to zero-emission vehicles by 2035 and have those trajectories to make it look more realistic at those increasing numbers of volumes out until that point. That long-term policy certainty, we hope will also help manufacturers change that new market. So in terms of greater emphasis on manufacturers to consider the needs of the different types of models and the volumes that will need to be produced to meet that ZEV mandate target, but to also meet the needs of their customers when they have to be buying zero-emission vehicles. So we're hoping to see a real change in the type of models available and the range of different types of vehicles. And the second point is also that long-term policy certainty, providing investment opportunities for charge point operators if they also can see that that volume of zero-emission vehicles is increasing, and to take advantage of that and put out the charge point infrastructure ahead of need again, so people feel more confident to make that switch.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We've had a few questions in around charging accessibility, especially on the sort of rapid charging space and the sort of high-speed network. I guess there's a question here around, you've got the consumer regs which come in, which, you know, are what they say on the tin, consumer regs. Is there a plan or any thinking about, you know, non-consumer or expanding those to make more van-friendly regs? Or how do we make sure that vans are able to access charge points and they're not sort of incidents happening at charge points as have happened in the recent past, where folks are not so happy to see vans on the charging network if they even try?
Yeah, so the consumer regulations really hope are a framework that we're putting in place for charge point operators to increase best practice across the board. So things like open data requirement, we hope that by making all charge points open up their data, that provides huge opportunities for the private sector to take that data and increase the accessibility of that to drivers, including van drivers. So you know kind of in advance whether you're going to be able to fit in the charge point there. You know the type of features that charge point has. So you can plan and advance your journey and you know more about the experience that you're going to have. In partnership with that, kind of we're doing a lot of work with local authorities around the Local Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Fund. Local authorities have a really in-depth knowledge of kind of their local area, the businesses in the area, the type of journeys that their residents are taking. And we're encouraging them through the Local Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Support Body and the Knowledge Hub to kind of think through the checklist when they're considering their charging strategy and their application for that Levi funding, to make sure that they have considered vans, they have considered the needs of their local area. So they can really be taken into account in that charging infrastructure strategies.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. A question on around the sort of 4.25 ton question, one which I'm sure you will relish. Firstly, thank you so much on the sort of driver license side. We've seen some nice announcements out of OZEV on that quite recently, which is brilliant news. But unfortunately, again, as always, not a simple matter of just driver's licenses. There's still the challenge of MOTs and 4.25 ton vehicles getting MOT'd as a truck. And similarly, the challenges around driver's hours and sort of distances from base. Is there still work going on that? How are we going to sort of get over all those hurdles? Is that something in train?
Yes, that's definitely something in train. So we made the flexibilities around the driving license and weight thresholds in recognition that kind of with the battery, some of the larger vans were tipping over into the weight category to have to comply with additional regulations. And that does not have equal treatment between petrol and diesel vans and electric vans and incentivise their transition. So the aim behind that was to kind of make that a level playing field, despite the fact that the battery tips you over into that slightly heavier category. We are running in advance on that driving licence. And as you said, Tom, we've just released the government response confirming that we will be bringing legislation to make even more improvements to those driving licensing, so removing the training requirement and making it just zero emission vehicles rather than all alternative fuels. We are continuing to work with our colleagues across DFT to make sure that that principle of not being penalised just because you're driving a zero emission vehicle that has a slightly heavier weight doesn't become a barrier. So I know the MOT consultation was last year considering this, and I know they're working through at the moment what their kind of formal response and legislative vehicles coming forward may be. And we are working with our colleagues who own the policy app on driving hours, speed limiters, tachographs, to make sure where we can try and have consistency where it is safe to do so across all of those different types of regulation. So definitely something that we're working on, and definitely keen to ensure that consistency wherever possible.
Yeah, really good to hear. It's all on the agenda. Now, a difficult question. I'd be amazed if you're able to answer this in a straightforward way. We've had a question in the chat. What's going to happen to the plug-in grant? It's meant to phase for vans. It's meant to phase out. Well, it's up until 2025. What does that mean? What can we expect? Again, I would be amazed if you're able to give us a clear answer, but I'll ask it all the same.
So as I spoke about a bit earlier, we do recognise that kind of zero emission vehicles do still currently have a higher upfront cost than their kind of counterparts, petrol and diesel, when they're new, although we're starting now to see some real benefits in the used market where some of those are now becoming at parity or even cheaper in some cases. We hope that the ZEV mandate, as I said earlier, will increase the volume and the different range of models, and hopefully drive down costs as well as we go up towards 2030, 2035. But we know that the plug-in van grant continues to be an important mechanism for helping to reduce the upfront cost. We have said that it will continue until at least 2025, as you said, Tom, but we continue to keep all grants under review to make sure that they are delivering the policy intent that we want, and continue to be value for money for the taxpayer, which is really crucial whenever you look at government spend. So it is continually under review, but can't kind of confirm exactly what the future and then potential end dates may be.
I would have been amazed if we'd heard about some sort of impact on this webinar, but one can't help but ask. There have been a few questions around times to connect to the grid, both for depots, but also for the actual sort of motorway charging network itself. I know there have been some announcements recently as part of the sort of plan for drivers and others talking about trying to smooth that process in general. It's something we're talking on. Is there anything you can talk to there around how we might see the grid process, the grid connection process improve, both for really big projects, but also for smaller projects in the near term?
Yeah, we know that grid connections and the time it takes and the process to get the grid connection is a barrier at the moment to the rollout of charging infrastructure, and actually to the rollout of other clean energy technologies as well. So it is something that it is a priority across all of government at the moment. So you'll have seen kind of in the autumn statement, I mentioned the Grid Connections Action Plan that is looking to tackle that queue, if you like, in terms of connecting to the grid, and does call out specifically kind of electric vehicle infrastructure and other clean technologies and enabling their access to the grid. So alongside that, we're continuing to work with industry, with National Grid, with Ofgem on kind of other ways that we can do things in the meantime. So through the plan for drivers, committed to kind of working with distribution network operators and charge point operators to try and smooth the process for getting those grid connections. With the Rapid Charging Fund, those early interventions is making use of some of the green recovery funding that Ofgem has for putting in that resilience for the electricity grid. So alongside kind of the big government changes announced through the Connections Action Plan, which will be really important, we are also doing things alongside to kind of help in the short term as well address those issues of connecting to the grid. Yeah,
really interesting. I see this session is running out of time, so I'm just going to ask one last question. I guess it's a joint question and a plea. The plea is, always from the van side, it's about keep making sure that all the great work you're doing, and I think this conversation shows there's a lot of thinking going on in OZEV about vans. It is coming to the fore and is known by the community. So thank you so much for coming on the webinar. We can always hope that sort of in your press releases, etc., that vans get the focus they deserve. But I guess the question is really, what are you looking to industry for? If you had sort of one ask of industry and sort of the sector, what would you like us to be focused on and sort of how we make the transition work and the role you see it us playing?
So we really value conversations with industry in terms of talking to us about what isn't working and what is working and kind of where you think additional support is needed. So continue to value those conversations and encourage you to keep talking to us or keep talking to us through the BVRLA. The second piece is that final measure that I talked about in the plan for drivers, which is kind of on myths and misconceptions. We need a number of different trusted voices to be talking about the benefits of zero emission vehicles that we can see and the importance of that transition and kind of tackling some of the misinformation that is out there that kind of adds to disincentives about the transition. So that is where you've had a good experience or where you've overcome a particular challenge that at first seemed kind of too difficult. Please do keep talking to your colleagues across industry and advocating for the transition, because it is really important kind of for our air quality, for our climate change objectives. So that would be my ask back to industry.
Brilliant. Lizzie, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And now we are moving on to our panel. So hopefully they will start magically popping up on the screen with me. That is amazing. So we have Ash from Allstar, Michelle from ProHire, Matt from Mitie, and Paul from EV Essentials. Hopefully all known figures to everyone. Is brilliant to have such an esteemed panel with me today. I'm going to do the usual. If we could go around the room and if you could give a little bit of what you see as the current state of affairs in the van transition, and what are the biggest challenges you grappling with in your work, and how we should be thinking about this. So if I can start based on my order on the screen, if we can start with Michelle.
Morning, everyone. I think there's lots of conversations going on at the moment, and I think obviously a lot of stuff appears in the posts in the press with regards to the negative press that gets received, and I sometimes think that's possibly a bit of scaremongering, and sometimes that can be the hardest things to overcome. There's so many challenges out there, but there are so many conversations and things happening that I think we're so quick to focus on the negative that actually very quickly we can forget about all the positives that are happening. You know, the increase of electric vehicles, the increase of infrastructure, it's all happening. But I think a lot of the time it's all about sharing the knowledge and sharing information of what the art of the possible actually is. You know, talking to Matt before we came online about the achievements that they're making, you know, sharing that information on these kind of platforms becomes really key. So I think, yes, there are challenges there, but there is so many positives going on, and we get so distracted by that I think this is the key point now. It's all about understanding the art of the possible. It's all about collaboration and working together and sharing the knowledge. Yes, the bad, the negatives of what people have experienced, but actually really focusing on what they're doing to overcome those challenges. I think that's really important, because actually when you sit down and you kind of focus on specific areas, you'd be surprised by what can actually be achieved with regards to charging the vehicles, with regards to technology that's available. And you can't necessarily change the world overnight, but there's so many things that you can do in the meantime while we wait for certain things to catch up with themselves. So I think that's the key thing really, is it's sharing information for me. It's collaborating, and data is so critical. Data from the chargers, data from the vehicles, data from the fleet operators of what they're experiencing. You know, it's not just about the range, it's about the payload and the capability of what those vehicles can do. And they're probably the key things for me.
No, brilliant. Moving on to Matt, the man who's making things possible.
Yes, I mean, I've got to agree a lot with what Michelle said there. Collaboration is absolutely key. Everybody knows that Mitie is a bit of a leader in EV transition. We've been working on this since 2018. And the reason we went into transport consultancy was because so many people were asking us how we did it. So it's kind of like, how do we make this a reality? So the transport consultancy team was born. I think we have to recognize that with ELCV in particular, it is just not as easy to transition as cars due to the operational requirements of the vehicles. Regardless of the size of a fleet, an operator needs to know that they can charge the vehicle adequately to complete a journey, and the driver needs to be confident as well. So this is kind of having a big impact on how infrastructure is deployed, be that at home, be that at depot. And there's a lot of fleets that don't have home capability of charging or depot. So what do they do? Where do they go? There's another thing for me on the collaboration piece. I've been to a couple of events recently which have been either fleet driven or they've been EV infrastructure driven, and they don't cross over very well. So you go to an award ceremony for infrastructure and there is nobody there from the fleet side of the industry. You go to a fleet industry event and there's very few people there from the charging and infrastructure space. And Ash is probably one of those people that collaborates and sees this crossover because of what he did and what he created. But I won't say they're polarized, but actually, if we can get fleet people and infrastructure people really talking together, I'm not talking about fleet managers here. I'm talking about the industry, the manufacturers of this stuff and everything. We may well have a very simple solution to a lot of what we do. But it's collaboration, it's education. Everybody on this call knows all about EV. They know all about electric vehicles. They know all about charging. And maybe we're speaking at too high level. A lot of people are only just coming into this. So we've got to start at a basic level for people to really understand what's going on and what they need to do. So yeah, plenty of opportunity, plenty of positives out there. Again, agree with Michelle. We have to stop focusing on the negatives. We have to stop responding to those negatives and getting into he said, she said conversations and actually prove what we can really do. As we said at the start of the call, by the end of March, Mitie's combined fleet, cars and light commercials, will be more than 65% electric. That'll be more than 4,500 vehicles. It can be done, but it does take a lot of careful consideration.
Yeah. It's not easy, but it's possible. Ash, as the man who straddles the two worlds, what are your insights?
Yeah, I think depending on the type of operation, the type of business that you're running, really depends on what the challenges are with LCV. So I think with company car, we've obviously got the significant benefit in kind savings, and that's massively driving adoption of electric cars, and almost people will just find a way if the incentive is big enough. Whereas in the van world, for the driver specifically, there's little incentive financially to get into a van. So we have to look at other things. I mean, we work with some of the biggest fleets and some of the smallest fleets, including Mitie, and it's amazing when you really push the boundaries, how fast and how far you can go. Mitie's a prime example of that, and others are struggling, with one or two. I think there has to be an acceptance, especially in LCV world, that the operation has to change. We talk about, can't really name them, but you'll all know who I'm talking about. The people that deliver our parcels, they're used to just parking as many vans in a single depot as they possibly can. That can't happen in electric world, because there just simply isn't enough power to to charge all those vehicles, and they'd have to develop a little power station side. So we have to think differently, and I think sometimes one of the challenges, it's beyond just the fleet manager's responsibility. It bleeds into operations and finance and HR, and everybody's got to come together to really make the transition work.
It's a challenging one. Paul, as the man on the front line, what are you hearing as our correspondent out there? What are you hearing? What are your words of wisdom?
Well, a lot of the words of wisdom have already been used. I'm going to gently disagree with the sort of focus on the negative. I do think we do need to see those challenges and tackle them head on, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. Yes, we do need to deal with that. The challenges that we've highlighted with regard to the weight considerations around 4.25 tons, the bringing back of VED for 2025. Again, the messaging is kind of a little bit challenging, and actually we've often said within the echo chamber, the church of electrification, as I sometimes call it, that we say 2035, no, it doesn't matter at all, everybody's staying with the plan. But talking to the coalface, the people that are selling these vehicles to the other half of the market that hasn't yet been addressed, the small to medium enterprises, the 1 to 10s, if you like, not the 5,000 and 6,000 that we've got with Mitie. The smaller operator is walking into a dealership and the dealers are going, yeah, don't worry about it, we've got these diesel vehicles over here, we've got to get rid of those. The 2035 now, you got a bit more time, just take a diesel now. And that's actually physically happening, and I'm getting those calls and being asked to come and talk to dealers to help kind of change that mindset and help understand that the ZEV mandate actually is in from next year. We moved out to 2035, then the ZEV mandate was broadly confirmed. They're still talking about it in Parliament. They like to talk in Parliament, don't they? And then we will hopefully get it all confirmed. But then that message needs to get out, and we need to see that we have a collective responsibility to deliver the ZEV mandate with 10% each year. And I think the important point here is that we don't all need to change everything overnight. It is about finding those areas where we can get started. We've got to deliver 10% of our vehicles next year, 16% of the vehicles the year after, 19%. Let's work with that and find areas to get started. There's plenty of product on the marketplace. We were talking about, we've heard comment that there's not enough range, there's not enough variation. There is enough range and there is enough variation in many operations, and we can easily meet that 10% number if we make the messaging clear and get the facts out there for people to make good decisions on.
That's a really strong point, Paul. Thank you. So I have some questions here, but I'm already getting a whole bunch from the audience. So I want to jump into that immediately. We've had one directed at Matt, but I think it'll spread beyond, and please do chip in after Matt. And that's about the take-home van challenge. And I know this is a massive challenge. So Matt, if you could talk a little bit to your experience, and others, please come in after that. And Matt, you're on mute currently.
Yeah, Matt's on mute.
Yes. See, that's what happens when you're polite and you kind of mute before you cough and take a drink. So I'll give you two views on this. I'll give you the Mitie view, and I'll give you some of the views from our clients as well that we're experiencing. From a Mitie perspective, from day one, we have supported our employees through putting chargers in homes. We have focused on the low-hanging fruit, as any fleet will, transitioning those vehicles that are lower mileage, where a driver can have a home charger fitted, the easier stuff. As we've gone into the more complex, we've looked at where our vehicles dwell. So where do they spend time that they could charge? So we've looked at our own depots and offices, and we've deployed infrastructure there. And we're now deploying infrastructure at our at our clients' locations. So we recognize that sometimes you've got to reverse the process. So a vehicle is going to be spending 8 hours at an office working 3 times a week. Okay, he or she can't have a home charger fitted. Let's put a charger at the opposite end of the scale. What we're also doing, rather than just deploying our own infrastructure, we're helping our clients understand how we can utilize their infrastructure. Back to collaboration again. And actually, we are happy to pay to use their infrastructure and support them in installing it. So it's a win-win in every situation. And the other thing we find from that is where the client hasn't necessarily thought about that, they then open their infrastructure out for other on-site contractors and the likes of. From a client perspective, i.e. the clients we're helping transition, a number of them haven't thought about home charging, believe it or not. They are very much focused on depot. And again, when they see where their vehicles spend time, they look at it in a slightly different way and look at doing a combined solution. So it is a really complicated one. But actually, there are some quite easy solutions out there. We just have to go outside the box of, we go to a fuel station and fill it up. It really is. It's about, okay, what can we do? Where can we put it? How do we help our employees charge? We have vehicles that never leave site. Quite literally, they stay on a site for their entire life. They do 10 miles a day. And again, there we're deploying infrastructure, if you like, stranded assets that we control and manage where we need to. So that's our approach, and it's working pretty well.
Ash, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, okay, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of home charging, and I think lots of our customers have seen a huge success in that area. I mean, it's the cheapest today. It's around half the price of charging in public, and again, depending on what kind of energy agreements you've got in place at work, it's also could be around half the price of work as well. But a lot of people are put off because it requires infrastructure being installed in a driver's home. The perception is it can be quite expensive, but the payback is very fast, I would say. So just as a headline example, to install a charger at home, you're talking maybe around £1,000. But if you were to shift 100% of charging from public to home, which I appreciate may not happen, but in some cases it may actually happen, you'll be saving around £20 for every single charge session or charge event, especially if you're charging a van, with a 60, 70 kilowatt battery. So, you've only got to do that twice a week, and your savings are £2,000. So, that's just pure electricity alone. Forget the downtime, the lock of productivity. Drivers love charging at home as well, by the way. Like you start your day, full battery, off you go. Rarely are you going to be stopping anywhere. So, I'm a fan of it, and I know, like Matt says, it's kind of low hanging fruit. Right? If you've got drivers with a driveway, you can start there because it's easy. They're the easy wins.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Paul, are you trying to jump in there?
Well, I'm just slightly jumping at the bit in the sense that we've got a real challenge. Yes, the low-hanging fruit is there, right? We can do the 10 or 15% of people that are taking a van home will be able to charge it at home. We've got loads of challenges around that in terms of insurance, in terms of, like versus the company car. There's covenants on land that mean you can't park a commercial vehicle on it. And I don't want to paint a really difficult picture, but I do want to say we need other solutions. Productivity is killed by public charging, and I've gone on record. People don't like it, but it's commercial suicide if you just rely on public charging to charge your vehicles. CPOs have usually gone, oh, shh, don't say that. But it's really expensive, right? We've got to get a commercially viable solution that doesn't impact productivity. Productivity is critical when it comes to commercial vehicles. It's all about uptime. It's all about revenue that you get from your vehicle. So we've got to come up with a solution that allows things. And I love Mitie's way of working there, working with our clients to highlight the dwell time of their vehicles. I'm guessing that they use data to heat map where those vehicles were stationary for lengths of time, where you can identify opportunities to deploy charging infrastructure, working in collaboration with your customers, with people that you're delivering to, all of those kinds of things. We need a new way of thinking around this. And I mean, there are some really great solutions out there, but again, they're still a little bit expensive. But mobile charging solutions that are able to deliver overnight, there's no one silver bullet here. There is a variety of things that will meet the need. But, charging those vehicles that go home, the van drivers of our nation do not all have nice swanky driveways and all of that sort of stuff, and being able to deploy home charging. So I think we need a variety of solutions, and great to see what Mitie have done there. And I think that's a really good place to start in that collaboration piece.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think you touched on something there, which, Michelle, you also hit on about data and the need to get involved with data. And that's actually something I see a questions come in around the role of data and how you use that to really maximize this. Could you talk a little bit about the data side for yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, when we look at the customers that we've got, it's a real mixed bag of fleet profile. So anything from your car derived vans through to your tractor units and trailers. So it's trying to understand what that fleet profile actually does during its working day. What does it actually do? And the best way to do that is by having that data and those analytics, so telematics fitted to the vehicles. Now, projects that we've worked on, we've worked very closely with customers to really understand and fit telematics to their diesel vehicles, to understand during the operating day, where are those vehicles going? What are they doing? What's their idling time? And with that data, what you're able to then do is start to understand the art of the possible, because sometimes people just don't quite know where to start. Exactly what everybody's talked about, that low hanging fruit. Sometimes businesses are such in early stages that they don't know what that low hanging fruit looks like. But that data actually gives them physical information that allows them then to kind of understand, well, these batch of vehicles can go electric. These vehicles, we maybe need to hold fire a little bit, but that at least gives them a starting point. But what that data then allows them to do is to start planning and future proofing. So what is the art of the possible now? What's the medium term goals? And then what's the long term goals? So that low hanging fruit sometimes for some businesses is, what is that? They just don't know. But that data allows us to understand that. Then once those vehicles and those businesses start transitioning into electric vehicles, for example, it starts to give them a starting point of data of, right, okay, so now we understand not only that, but our confidence is starting to grow in what is the art of the possible. And that's not just feedback from the telematics. That's not just feedback from board members sitting around the table, having conversations, but this is actual feedback from the drivers as well, of confidence, training and everything. And that's really critical. So when we're talking about data, it's the data of your fleet now, but actually it's the data of the fleet that you end up with, of how that helps then grow it back into the business, because you're able to take back into the business what you're actually achieving on range, on payload, on the routes. And business models change as a result of this. Any business that says their business model hasn't changed, I'd be interested to understand how it hasn't changed, because there is a lot of that needs to happen. And once businesses become open to these things, but again, this all comes down to knowledge. We have many years of data of the diesel side that then transitioned over to the electric side of things, but it's then sharing it on these kind of flat platforms that give people the confidence to, potentially start their journey or elevate it to the next level.
I think that's fascinating. I'm going to ask a follow-up right away. How do you build that trust? Because to me, it sounds like there's a lot of trust needed in that process between you and your partners and your customers as well. That one, you're going to say, we're going to take you on this business model changing journey. That seems quite intimidating to me. And, we're going to make it work. And they're not going to be massive pitfalls, or there are, and we'll get over them. I'm not sure. How do you build that trust?
I think open honesty. Don't set yourselves up to fail. Changing the world overnight, we would all love to do that, but let's not do that. So let's be open and honest about what you can actually do. The last thing you want to do is get a fleet of vehicles that end up becoming really expensive ornaments parked in the car park. That achieves nothing. That also gives hesitation and nervousness into the business for what the future then brings. Many times we've had conversations and at shows and on platforms like this and just in face-to-face meetings, 10 years ago we tried this, or 5 years ago we tried this and it didn't work. those things, they carry on, and people talk about that stuff because it's what they remember. But if you can be open and honest about the art of the possible, and yes, it's not always plain sailing, and I'm sure everybody on live today has experienced the negatives, but actually it's being able to share that and then kind of going, we learn from it, and we don't always get it right, but again, it's being open and honest about, we didn't get it right, but we learned from it. And as long as you've got companies that you're working with that kind of understand, we're all on a really steep learning curve here, and it isn't always going to be plain sailing. But if we can all be open and honest with each other, I think that then builds the trust. And then when you start seeing action and you start seeing the results of those actions, that then kind of builds the confidence, and people are a little bit like, right, game on, what's next? We've done that was a challenge, but we've learned from it. What are we going to do next? It's all about trust and sharing that information.
That makes total sense. Compelling stuff. Now we are running short on time, so I'm gonna do two things. Firstly, I'm gonna volunteer all of you without pre-asking that if there are questions, insights that folks want from the crowd listening, write to us, drop us a message, and we can share it with yourselves. This is a community resource. I feel you're all very generous with your time. Thank you. But please, those listening, get in touch. Just keep this conversation going. It's a complex area. Half an hour of a panel does not do it justice. There are so many brains here that we can pick. Then my second thing is we're going to do a little bit of a roundup. I'm going to go to each of you one by one. If you can tell me your takeaway you want for this audience, and if you could please try, even Paul, I know you're very negative, Paul, but if you can try and put in a little bit of hopefulness for 2024. What is it that you're really keen on in 2024? What you're excited about? What you think is going to change in the transition? So I'm going to start with you, Paul. Put you on the spot, and then we'll work our way backwards.
Do you know what? I'm here at the London EV show, and what I'm seeing is only a small smattering of vans are on display. But what I will say is that there are opportunities to electrify almost every area with the advent, and we've got no manufacturers on today, but the coming of the Iveco E Daily, it has answered so many solutions at a particular price point. But let's take the win, right? That it comes with so many things that are tricky to do already, like towing and taking power out of the vehicle and other things like that. We're seeing vehicles come to market that are absolutely meeting the need of some of, not all of, the needs of the marketplace. So for me in 2024, we've got a very, very clear target. 10% of the vehicles must be electric, and I hope everybody embraces that. My call to action is that we all embrace that ZEV mandate and take responsibility as operators, as people that are in the industry. We're not selling the vehicles, and the fines are all for those that sell the vehicles, but they're going to come down to us eventually in the ways of pricing and all of that kind of stuff. So let's really focus on that ZEV mandate, take ownership of it. And I think Michelle touched on it, that we need to do something different. We need to embrace change. We need to be open to have a blank canvas, approach that just gives us the opportunity to paint a new picture, to really go with new ways of doing things that are more efficient, more effective, and look to reinvent our businesses. And at the end of the day, I think the key that we all want to leave is collaboration. Let's work together. Let's answer each other's questions. Let's help each other. Let's be positive. Yeah, I know. Yeah, but also let's not take any from government legislators and people like that. Let's kind of say, no, hang on, that's wrong. We need to tackle that. So address the wrong, go with the right, and embrace. There's a lot of great vehicles out there. Just get the right help in choosing those vehicles, and you'll be fine.
Brilliant, Paul. Very positive. Ash, over to you.
Yeah, I think from a van perspective, just make a start. If you've got the opportunity to electrify even just one van, and one van could be a half your fleet, but one van could be less than 1% of your fleet. But just do it, because you'll learn something. We are equivalent of like maybe the iPhone 2, if that ever existed, and in 10 years' time we'll have the iPhone 15, and the vans will go on a similar journey. We're right at the very start of EV technology, and it's already, I think, pretty good, and it's only going to get better. But the best way to experience it and to learn and to make sure you're adapting your organisation is to make a start and start small.
Sage advice. And Matt, as someone who has more than started, it is racing towards the finish line. What is your insight?
Oh dear, I don't know if the finish line will ever come because we just keep growing the fleet. I think for me, obviously we're going to exceed 65% of our fleet electrified, and there is a real focus on van at the moment. And I won't share numbers, but we're delivering a lot per month over the next 6 months. I think new and more vehicles coming to market. As Paul said, there's almost something for everybody. Let's keep that going. Let's see more of that appear. Manufacturing is a global industry now, so we're all looking for the same. I think we need to get this group together with Lizzie, and we need to sit down in a room with Lizzie and have a conversation, because I think that there is we need a more diverse view into government around what needs doing, and I think there are a lot of people who are having regular conversation, and I think we need to change that a little bit. And two more LCVs, more eLCVs on the road next year. I think it's going to accelerate. I think what we've seen, the dip this year, is because last year there was pent-up demand. We were waiting for manufacturers to deliver. Now we're going into natural cycle. I think it's going to see it accelerate. And my final one, you will see a launch of eLCV charging bays for public use next year. And I can tell you that because I'm working with a client who is going to do it. So next year, across various locations in the UK, there will be dedicated eLCV bays, and they are not where you think they're going to be.
An exciting teaser right there.
Can I
Michelle.
just say I agree with Matt? But I will promise to be nice to Lizzie.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Fair enough. Michelle, final words. We're running down the clock here.
Okay. I think we need to be practical. We need to be open-minded. We need to collaborate, not set ourselves up for failure. The biggest thing, we need to be brave, because out of all our customers that have done this, not one of them has ever looked back and gone, shouldn't have done it, not a single one. So we need to start being brave and take that blood plunge. Exactly what Ash said, whether it's 1 vehicle, 30 vehicles, 100 vehicles, thousands of vehicles, we need to be brave with this stuff.
Yeah. What a great line to end on. Exactly. A knowledge bomb, indeed. Thank you so much for attending. Those of you who are listening in, thank you so much to our panel. As I say, I'm volunteering them for any questions which have come on later. This video will be made available again to watch on the BVRLA website. And as always, we will go into next year with an aggressive campaign of fleet and charge activities. And as you can see, we've already got a conference lined up for 2024, which I hope I will see you all at. If I don't see you before Christmas, have a good Christmas and a safe New Year. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.